Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. In the next 35 minutes, I'll take you through today's newspaper, the Hindu Delhi edition, and we'll take up three very important articles for discussion from civil service examination perspective. The articles that we will take up for discussion has been displayed on the screen and timestamping for the same has been provided in the description section. This article from page number 6, titled The Anatomy of Anti-Black Racism, is an important one. This is important for essay paper, this is important for the society section of GS paper 1, this is also very important for the interview. This is an important current topic, this is the burning issue of current time, and you must very clearly understand the issue. Despite the civil war over slavery, the civil rights movement for dignity and equality, systemic discrimination and violence against blacks persist. Racism continues, it refuses to recede. The beginning of racism is the development of concept of race. That is the preliminary to the concept of racism. The concept of race is based on classification of human beings into different groups on the basis of color of their skin, their facial and bodily features, like for example the shape of their eyes, their nose, their lips, their hair, etc. etc. As such, there is no problem if you note the color of skin of a person, if you note their bodily features, if you classify the human race just for the purpose of classification, there is no harm in it. In fact, it is also required in giving proper references in literature. But if you start to give motives to your classification and if you start to draw unnecessary, unscientific conclusion, then you are drifting and drowning into racism. For example, there was a concept of scientific racism. It was rather pseudo-scientific based on instinct of scholars, and now this has been discarded. But this theory lived very much among the scientific community till Second World War, and it was very prominently accepted in 1930s. In one of the work, Types of Mankind, the authors were implying that Negroes were the creational rank between Greeks and chimpanzees. That is unscientific, and racism inherently is unscientific. Let's now understand how racism, which is a socio-cultural construct, is evolved. First step, as we have already talked about, is classification of humans into different races. Race formation is a first and necessary step. It is not sufficient in itself, but formation of race, classifying human beings into different groups, is the first step in evolution of racism. The second and the crucial leap forward from the concept of race to racism is the belief that biological characteristics are necessarily related to certain dispositions, traits of characters, human behavior, meaning from the biological characteristic, from ethnicity, from racial features, you can predict behavior of people. That precisely in simplistic term is racism. If by looking at the person you can judge his character, then you are racist. Because it is in the concept of racism that there is a predisposition. If you belong to certain race, you will have certain traits of character. Linking physical feature with behavior, that is actually constructing racism. Then this concept of racism is widened and made watertight so that it develops and it survives and gets hardened with time. It is also believed that these shared features, not only the physical feature, but also the character and behavior, they are intergenerationally transmitted, implying that a newborn baby will already have some character traits, irrespective of the social environment in which the baby will grow up. That means racism naturalizes a person's character. Person's culture and ethics will depend on the race of which he is descendant of. In the realm of racism, lack of education will not be seen as socio-economic deprivation, but will be seen as a low IQ level that person is holding because he or she is belonging to a particular race. If you have artificially attributed a characteristic of low IQ to that race, then descendant of that race will have low IQ, irrespective of the socio-economic condition. Similarly, our capacity of reasoning, our capacity to become civilized, our propensity towards sexual lasciviousness. Author uses this example also, and the meaning of which you have to find out yourself. The ability to make money, everything that depends on the race of which you are descendant of. Now, once you have ensured that people belongs to different races, and these races have certain characteristics based on which the characters and behavior of descendants can be predicted. And you have also stated that these are intergenerationally transmitted. Now, in the concept of racism, you have to arrange these groups into hierarchy. Those on top are intrinsically superior to those at bottom. This is very crucial. Intrinsically, this is used to justify violence as well. Certain races are considered to be superior, certain races are considered to be inferior, and certain races are at the bottom, to be the inferior most. So pale, so uncivilized, that they are not worth living with. The differences are innate. They are from birth, they are naturally there, and they are indelible. You cannot do away with it. It is permanently there. One cannot cease to have what he already inherited, and he cannot acquire what he does not already have. This is the concept of racism, and you understand there is nothing scientific about it. It's an ideology and it's purely cultural and social construct. Now we have to understand the consequence of racism and how it justifies and even glorifies violence. If some races are superior and some races are inferior and they are permanent, then superior race would not like to mix and get polluted by the inferior race. That is a natural thing. If you are superior, why would you like to become inferior? People forget that this is an artificial construct. If this is embedded permanently in your mind by the process of socialization and you have forgotten this fact that this is unscientific and you are working on the assumption that this is true, then you would not like to mix with others because you are superior. In many southern states of the United States, interracial marriages are not allowed. And even by law, public lynching is sanctioned if somebody does it. Can you see how violence is coming out of this artificial, unscientific, inhuman classification? Let us now understand how racism leads to violence a little bit more. This hierarchy of different races provides a motive, a purpose, a justification to superior race, let's say whites, to treat blacks in ways that would be viewed as cruel or unjust if applied to members of their own group. But since it is being applied to members of other groups with a purpose, that superior race remains superior and does not get polluted, and with the notion that inferior races have certain characteristics. They are at lower level of civilization. They are the thieves, they are uncivilized, they are unhygienic, they are drug peddlers, they are women traffickers. If you attribute characteristics like this, then violence automatically gets justified. And as we have just talked about, public lynching is sanctioned by law in some of the southern states of United States if there is interracial marriage. Some of the races are considered so pale, so inferior, so uncivilized that they are not worth living with. This is most infamously illustrated in the anti-Semitism, the violence against Jews in the Nazi Germany that led to a solution against the Jews, and that solution was Holocaust, the genocide of the Jews, their extermination, their incarceration, the murder, butchering of Jews throughout Europe. And the lesser inferior race, like the black Americans, the Africans, they are left. They are left to live, but only to be controlled, subordinated, and enslaved. The blacks are considered to have innate streak of savagery. Naturally, they are uncivilized. They are primitive in their characteristics. And they need to be kept down by brute force and even violence from time to time, or they will explode and destroy the civilization of the whites. And this is the most dangerous thinking in the concept of racism. This belief that you have to show violence, you have to use brute force to keep them down. This led to the merciless killing of George Floyd. Racism has survived because it has been institutionalized. It has been imbibed in the way of living, and people have completely forgotten the basis of racism, has accepted it as reality. It has become socio-economic political reality in the European nations, and that has limited the opportunity for the black people. Because of that, they indulge in petty crimes, they are imprisoned, and then there is a stigma of imprisonment, and there is severe discrimination against the blacks because of the imprisonment. If they are given a charge of felony is serious crime in the English legal jurisprudence. And in number of southern states in America, if a person is declared felon, a person who has committed a serious crime, then he is disqualified from voting. So once the criminal justice system labels a person as criminal, then rest of the societies, the powerful ones, mostly the whites, they have the sanction to engage in all practices of subordination that they have apparently abandoned. But institutionally, subtly, silently, that's still happening. That is why the scholar Jane Hill, he has shown in his work that criminal system produce result as vicious as generated by color-based slavery and racial segregation. Because in several states of the United States, a black guy is 10 times more likely to go to prison than their white buddies. According to the Death Penalty Information Center of the United States, in the last 45 years, black defendants sentenced to death for killing the whites numbered 291, while the white defendants accused of killing the black were only 21. So death penalty for blacks were 14 times higher than whites. So you can see the criminal justice system is becoming the cradle of racism in the United States. So racism is not just an aggregate of mistaken belief by individuals. It is actually the way the social, economic, political institutions are functioning in the country. Racism today is more institutionalized. What is the solution? Solution cannot be an easy solution because problem is not a small one. Good education obviously is going to help, but it is so deeply and widely practiced, it is so much present in every institution, it is so difficult to remove. Even if you are watching US TV series, you would understand, you must have noticed that the menial characters or the negative characters, they are majorly played by the black ones. Still today, the author puts the hope, as was put by Martin Luther Jr., in peaceful movement, participated both by blacks and whites. Only a sustained peaceful movement can bring institutional changes. But the author is not quite sure, very pragmatically, that will the present movement erupted after the death of Mr. Floyd, will that be sustained? And will the system allow to sustain this? It's a fairly difficult question to answer, but I will love to hear from you. This news is from page number 14. Democrats in the United States are trying to bring a bill in the Congress for police reform. And of course, this is being brought in the backdrop of Mr. George Floyd dying in the hands of policemen. When the bill will be actually brought in the Congress, the news will be covered more elaborately in the lead articles and in the editorial. But for now, we do know the basic provisions and aim of the bill. The bill will be called as Justice in Policing Bill. The basic aim of the bill is to lower immunity standards of police officers. And one of the most important provisions of the bill is to ban racial profiling. Racial profiling basically refers to the practice by law enforcement officers of targeting individuals for suspicion of crime based on individuals' race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. For example, suppose if there's a case of kidnapping, the officers would be thinking of a black suspect. And this creates deep entrenched racism in the mindset of police officers. The bill also calls for restricting the use of lethal forces by police officers, and it specifically asks to ban chokeholds and carotid holds. Chokeholds meaning applying pressure by the arm on the front portion of the neck. Basically, it is done to subdue a suspect temporarily, and it chokes the supply of oxygen in the trachea. Carotid holds are similar kind of hold, but it is done sideways on the neck from where the carotid arteries goes up to the brain. And in carotid holes, within seconds, the person will fall unconscious. Although on releasing the pressure, most people get conscious again. And that is why it is used as a measure to temporarily subdue the suspect. But if it is done deliberately and with an evil intent, then the person may die, and we all know what happened to Mr. George Floyd. The bill also sought to create a national police misconduct registry. This is a novel idea, and the misconduct of police officers must be registered for internal inquiry and disciplinary purpose, for creating more accountability, and also for systemic reform in the police department. In fact, more comprehensive measure has been laid by Supreme Court of India in Prakash Singh versus Union of India case 2006, which we will be seeing very shortly. The bill also asks to do away with qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is a legal principle that was formulated by Supreme Court of United States, which actually exempt individual officers from liability in discharging their functions and practicing their discretionary power, unless they have violated clearly established provisions of any federal law. In short, they will not be individually liable. Although the government will be liable, the institution of police will be collectively liable. There is also a suggestion in the bill that officers must be wearing body cameras. Body cameras generally are placed in the front portion of the body, mostly chest, and many countries like Canada imposes this on police officers. These body cameras are very useful in constructing the series of events which leads to police excess or some mishappenings. And by provision like this, it will be easy for the Justice Department to investigate patterns of police misconduct. These are important goals of the bill, and these can be used as recommendation in our own police reform. Police reform is an important topic under GS paper 2. Question has not been asked on this in recent times, so it becomes important. You have to prepare a notes on police reform, and you can use these recommendations to make policing more democratic in India, make it more accountable. But perhaps the best reform in the police department would be self-accountability. And self-accountability will come if one understands what Lord Denning of the United States Supreme Court once remarked: "Be you ever so high, the law is always above you." Taking this opportunity, let's quickly recap some of the initiative and efforts in police reform in India. Serious effort was started to be made in police reform back in 1970s when Gore Committee on Police Training was appointed. Gore Committee recommended to enlarge the content of police training to add the element of understanding of human behavior, over and above training in developing acumen in law and order and crime prevention. National Police Commission 1977 recommended insulating police from illegitimate political and bureaucratic interference. But nothing was done, and only in 2006, after the Prakash Singh judgment, some steps were taken by the state governments. Padmanabhaya Committee recommended that constables in particular and other police officials in general must be given soft skills training, such as on communication, counseling, leadership, because they are the ones who are dealing with public on regular basis. Soli Sarabji Committee, also formally called as Police Act Drafting Committee, drafted a model police bill that was to be adopted by the state governments because police is a state subject, but there was no enthusiasm by any of the state to enact an act based upon this model police bill. Second ARC recommended the separation of crime investigation from other police functions. This is an extremely important recommendation because there is a conflict of interest. Generally, at lower level, police register the case, they make the charge sheet, and they also do the investigation. So most of the time, instead of finding the criminal, they are just framing the suspect. There is no open mind during the investigation process. Initially, they assume someone to be the suspect, and most of the time and energy goes on in proving and in framing the suspect as criminal. Then very comprehensive recommendation came from Supreme Court in Prakash Singh versus Union of India case in 2006. In this case, the Supreme Court directed the government to constitute State Security Commission. The State Security Commission, the purpose of it would be to ensure the state government does not exercise unwarranted influence or pressure on the police. Basically, this will be a policy recommending body to the state governments, and this will also recommend reforms at the systemic level. Sooner or later, after the judgment, most of the states have constituted this body, State Security Commission, but it has not been made functional and it has not been constituted in the manner and the way the Supreme Court asked it to be constituted. Supreme Court laid down many conditions for State Security Commission. For instance, there has to be leader of opposition as the member. There has to be independent members, members who are not part of government. Then the members of the State Security Commission will be selected by an independent panel, not by the government directly. And its recommendation has to be binding on the state government. And the annual report of the commission will be laid down before the legislature. But in that form, State Security Commission has not been formed except in one state, that is the state of Andhra Pradesh. The state of Andhra Pradesh has made the recommendation of the commission as binding. There is no other state which has done so. Supreme Court also directed to constitute Police Establishment Board that will comprise DGP and 4 senior officers. Basically, the purpose of this board is to direct transfers, postings and promotions and other service related issues for officers below the rank of DSP. Basically, to insulate it from undue political and bureaucratic pressure. All the states also have constituted Police Establishment Board, but it is only the state of Arunachal Pradesh that has empowered this body, and only in Arunachal Pradesh this body is fully functional. Supreme Court also directed establishment of Police Complaint Authority, where public can complain against police officers of the rank above DSP. But this body has not been constituted. Supreme Court also directed constitution of National Security Commission, which will be the body at the union level similar to State Security Commission. But National Security Commission also has not been constituted. Supreme Court also directed the government to ensure that DGP is appointed through merit-based transparent process and security of tenure is there of minimum 2 years. But so far, Nagaland is the only state that provides for tenure and independent selection of Director General of Police. Supreme Court also directed the government, reiterating what was recommended by the second ARC, that investigation and law and order functions must be separated. Although many of the states have initiated this process of separation of functions of investigation and law and order in cities, but still there are many states which has done nothing in this regard. There is a litigation pending in the Supreme Court against the contempt of court. This is contempt of court actually. When Supreme Court has directed this and state governments have not implemented, then the chief secretaries and the chief ministers of the state are in contempt of the court, they become liable. To summarize the police reform, and this content you can use in the conclusion of your answers concerning police reform, I'll be using what Supreme Court said in Yashwant versus State of Maharashtra case. In this case, there was brutal encounter in Maharashtra of a man and his wife by the police. The couple were dragged out of the house late at night, they were kept at the outskirts of city, and in early hours of the morning, they were shooted. Supreme Court made very strong observation in this case. Supreme Court laid emphasis on need to recognize the concept of democratic policing in our country. Supreme Court said that crime control is not the only end, but means to achieve this is also equally important. Supreme Court in its judgment, if you go through, also said that with great powers come great responsibility. Supreme Court said that officers who are called to administer the criminal law must bear in mind that they have a duty not merely to individual accused before them, but also to the state and to community at large. Supreme Court also said in the judgment that individual officers has to apply his or her mind in making a judgment, and he did not have to blindly follow the orders of the superior. He has to prove that the orders he believed were legal. Just obeying the orders of superior is no excuse. Supreme Court also quoted Lord Denning. Be you ever so high, the law is always above you. If every police officer imbibe this idea, he will never indulge in any excess or illegal action. This article is from page number 6, being vocal on the right local. The author is basically trying to say that we have to be vocal about local but without compromising on the efficiency of product and services. Although there is not enough content from exam perspective, but we'll still do it in our own way because it touches upon an important topic. Being vocal for local is a new call given by Prime Minister Modi during his call for Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India movement in response to the economic hardship that has been created by COVID-19 pandemic. And as part of this movement, he has coined the slogan Vocal for Local. Broadly, it will encompass the following three areas: boost to local manufacturing of goods. This will be done both by domestic and foreign companies. Vocal for local does not mean that we will be closed for foreign investment and technology. We will still encourage the foreign companies to come and participate in manufacturing in India. So, in this sense, this concept is quite similar to Make in India project that was initiated in 2014. This will also involve boost to local supply chain. The supply chain in India is the weakest link for internal and external trade. The logistic cost is around 14% of GDP, and this is quite high. Vocal for local will be having a third component, boost to demand for goods manufactured in India. And this perhaps is the only component different from Make in India campaign. The Indian customers are asked to be vocal about the Indian goods. They must not only buy Indian goods but also actively promote them. Government of India has not clearly outlined as to how it is going to promote vocal for local. However, the economists have pointed out the government may do so by following protectionist policies such as ban on import, increasing the custom duty, higher preference to domestic companies in government procurement, etc. In this regard, let us understand the strategies that government might adopt, which will be spelled out later, to promote local goods, and we'll also see the benefits and challenges for such a call. Following could be the possible strategy adopted by Government of India to promote local goods. First and foremost, it will appeal to the nationalistic sentiment. Indians will be asked to buy and promote Indian local goods as already has been announced in the speech of the Prime Minister. Second important tool could be FTAs. India already has withdrawn from RCEP and India is seriously reviewing the free trade agreements. India is seriously reviewing the existing free trade agreements to make them more India friendly. Custom duty and safeguard duty will also be important tools that will be very liberally used. India has already imposed safeguard duty in some of the goods such as solar panel cells to promote domestic manufacturing. Preferential treatment to Indian companies and especially MSMEs will be given and government has already started to give. For instance, you must be aware that recently government has disallowed global contractors in procurement of goods and services of value less than 200 crore. In any of the tenders floated by Government of India of value less than rupees 200 crore, global contractors will not be allowed. So it's a clear preferential treatment to Indian companies and MSMEs. Government can also go to further extent of banning the sale of imported goods and step already has been taken. Government of India has announced that all the canteens of Central Armed Police Forces will sell only indigenous products. Well, if you already have notes on Make in India, the benefit of Make in India, you can just translate here. That will also be the benefit of Vocal for Local, which is in concept Make in India. Vocal for Local will incentivize the foreign companies to shift their production base to India, and that will boost Make in India project and also create employment opportunities. However, Make in India has been launched in 2014 but has not been quite successful so far due to poor regulatory environment such as hurdles in land acquisition, delays in environmental clearance, complexity in labor laws. Mere slogan will not lead to increase in FDI. It has to be accompanied by deep structural reforms. As was pointed out by the Prime Minister, Brands that are global today were initially local and grew because of the customer support locally. Hence, buying and promoting the Indian brands will enable them to become global brands in the future. And that ultimately will increase the export from India. But however, this is not very easy to implement on ground because customers are utility maximizers. They buy goods which are superior in quality and at lower prices. Indian goods may not be able to compete with foreign goods in terms of quality and price. Mobile phones are just a case in point. Customers also buy foreign goods actually in order to improve their social status and prestige. So, this call for vocal to local has many hurdles, and psychological and behavior hurdle is just one of them. Success to vocal to local will result in development of local supply chain. And if local supply chain become very robust, then India will become self-dependent. If the internal trade becomes very robust, India's dependence on global export will decrease, and that will be very beneficial, especially in the background of grim global economic prospect. However, development of local supply chain will require skilled workforce, as seen in China, and for this India has to invest in Skill India campaign. There has to be some academic changes to be brought about in vocational educational institutes. New logistic courses has to be added and skill has to be enhanced in accordance to the demand of supply chain industry. Increased demand for Indian goods will also mean reduced dumping of goods by country like China, and that will improve our trade balance and trade deficit with China. But we all understand that the high demand for foreign goods, especially the Chinese goods, is mainly on account of price competitiveness. And unless we increase our economic efficiency, Indian goods will not be able to match the prices of imported goods. If this movement is really successfully carried out, that will result in increased investment through FDI. And the trickle down effect of FDI in any economy is very high. That will directly result in higher employment opportunities, higher per capita income. Higher per capita income will result in higher demand for goods, and that will further increase the investment and FDI. In short, that will pedal up the virtuous economic cycle. But however, as we have talked about already just few minutes back, that government is taking some protectionist steps like increasing the custom duty, preference to domestic companies in procurement, that is going to shield the domestic companies from foreign competition. This fosters complacency in domestic manufacturing, leading to decline in quality of goods on one hand, and that will also result in discouragement to the foreign investors on the other hand. India must realize that it was integration of Indian economy with global economy in 1991 that led to rapid increase in its GDP size from just $270 billion in 1991 to around $2.9 trillion in 2019. The government's strategy to boost local manufacturing is hinting towards a pre 1991 era, towards a protectionist anti globalization policies. This kind of policy in the present realm will be considered as retrograde. In the age of globalization, we must realize that every country can aspire to become self dependent, but it can never become so. It has to rely on other countries for a number of reasons, such as cheaper raw material, market for finished goods, attracting FDI and FPI, etc. Hence, India's call for vocal for local must factor in this reality. India's path towards Atmanirbhar has to take support of globalization rather than going against it. So, the right way of doing it could be bringing in structural reforms apart from just sloganeering the vocal for local call. There has to be focus on skill development, and there must be free and fair competition between foreign and domestic companies. Domestic companies must be encouraged to invest in R&D and improve the standards of their products to compete with the foreign companies. They must be given support, but they have to stand on their legs to compete globally. And if at all some protectionist measure has to be given, that must be restricted to MSMEs. India aspires to become $5 trillion economy, and this aspiration cannot be fulfilled by following closed economic model. India needs to be even more competitive, open and innovative to grow into larger economy. Hence, government must refrain from any protectionist or anti-globalization policy. We have come to the end of the discussion and now we will see question for the day. Yesterday's question was in the context of Indian economy, open market operation refers to. It was an easy candy given by Naved sir. The answer is option C. Today's question is consider the following statement. State Security Commission has been set up in all states to ensure that state government does not exercise unwarranted influence or pressure on the police. Statement 2 is National Security Commission has been set up by Government of India for selection and placement of chiefs of central police organizations with a minimum tenure of 2 years. Choose the correct option, one only, two only, both one and two, none of the above. With this, we have come to the end of the session, but your task will not be complete unless you solve the DNS quiz.